You prepare thoroughly and work harder than anyone else, yet victory slips away while others with less effort seem to win effortlessly. Every time you think you've done everything right, someone else claims the prize, leaving you wondering what hidden advantage you're missing. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist whose principles have guided victorious leaders for over 2,500 years. What I discovered about the true nature of victory will transform how you approach every challenge in your life. The same principle that won ancient wars can win your modern battles. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master victory. Let me tell you how I discovered the secret that would change the course of history. I was not born understanding victory. I learned it through devastating failure. In my early years as a military advisor in the kingdom of Wu, I believed what most people believe about winning, that superior numbers, better weapons, and harder training guaranteed victory. I studied formations, practiced with weapons until my hands bled, and memorized every tactical manual written by the masters before me. I was prepared for war in every way that seemed to matter. Then came my first real tester campaign against a smaller, supposedly weaker force. On paper, we should have crushed them. We had twice their numbers, better equipment, and months of preparation. I felt confident as I watched our disciplined ranks march toward what I assumed would be an easy victory. The battle was over in hours. We were not just defeated, we were humiliated. Their smaller force scattered our larger army like leaves in a storm. As I watched my men retreat in chaos, the bamboo scrolls where I had documented all my tactical knowledge seemed worthless. Everything I thought I knew about victory crumbled in a single afternoon. That night, sitting among the ruins of my confidence, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. Instead of making excuses or blaming my soldiers, I chose to study this defeat with the same intensity I had once studied victory. I began to ask different questions. Why had they won when logic said they should have lost? What did they understand that I had missed? I spent months analyzing not just that battle, but every conflict I could study. I interviewed veterans, examined historical records, and most importantly, I began to see patterns that had been invisible to me before. Winners and losers weren't separated by the obvious things, strength, numbers, or even preparation. They were separated by something far more subtle and far more powerful. The revelation came slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains. Victory wasn't about having the best tools or working the hardest. That was about understanding principles that most people never even considered. While everyone else focused on tactics and techniques, the consistent winners operated according to laws as reliable as gravity itself. This understanding transformed me from a tactics-focused advisor into a principle-focused strategist. I realized that my bamboo strategy scrolls, which had once contained mere battle formations, needed to hold something far more valuable, the fundamental patterns of victory that transcended any single battle or situation. Those scrolls would eventually become the foundation of everything I taught. But more importantly, they represented my transformation from someone who occasionally won through luck and force into someone who could create victory with the reliability of a master craftsman. The secret wasn't in the scrolls themselves, it was in understanding that victory follows laws, and those who learn these laws can win in any arena. After studying hundreds of victories and defeats, I discovered why most people fail to achieve consistent victory. Even when they work harder and prepare better than their competition, they approach victory with what I call the shattered jade. Warrior mind, set beautiful, skillful, courageous, but fundamentally flawed in their understanding of what actually creates winning outcomes. The first fatal approach is what I call strength worship, the belief that victory belongs to whoever works hardest, has the most resources, or possesses superior skills. I watch modern people fall into this trap constantly. They assume that if they just put in more hours, acquire more knowledge, or develop better abilities, victory will inevitably follow. This seems logical, but it's why talented, hard-working people often lose to those who seem less qualified. I learned this lesson watching my own highly trained, well-equipped armies lose to forces that should have been inferior. Raw strength and preparation matter, but they don't determine outcomes. What determines outcomes is how effectively you apply whatever strength you have. The second fatal approach is battle thinking, focusing on winning individual encounters instead of winning the overall campaign. Most people exhaust themselves fighting every small conflict with maximum intensity. They treat each workplace disagreement, each competitive situation, each obstacle as if it's the final decisive battle. This scattered approach guarantees inconsistent results because they win some battles while losing the war. I see this constantly in modern careers. Someone works incredibly hard on a single project, pours all their energy into one presentation, or fights passionately for one promotion, but they never develop an overall strategy for their professional success. They might win that project or presentation, but they remain stuck in the same position year after year because they're thinking tactically instead of strategically. The third fatal approach is reactive victory seeking, waiting for opportunities to appear and then competing fiercely for them. This creates the exhausting cycle of constant struggle that most people accept as normal. They see an opening, they fight for it. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but they're always at the mercy of circumstances beyond their control. I discovered the flaw in my own thinking during a campaign where I watched a much smaller force defeat multiple larger armies, not through superior fighting, but through superior positioning, while everyone else was preparing for direct confrontation. This force was creating conditions where direct confrontation wasn't necessary. They won before the battle began. This observation shattered my Jade Warrior mentality forever. I realized that what we call victory is usually just the visible result of invisible preparation. The real victory happens in the mind of the strategist who creates conditions where success becomes inevitable. Everything else, the actual confrontation, the visible effort, the final moment of triumph, is merely the natural consequence of superior positioning. Once I understood this, I stopped trying to be the strongest warrior and started becoming the most strategically positioned one. That shift changed everything. The golden compass of positioning sits before me as I share with you the supreme secret that transformed me from a defeated advisor into history's greatest strategist. This compass taught me that victory is not something you achieve in the moment of confrontation. Victory is something you create long before anyone realizes a competition has begun. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This principle, more than any other, separates those who win consistently from those who struggle constantly. Most people believe victory requires direct confrontation, superior effort, or overwhelming force, but the highest level of victory is achieved when your position becomes so advantageous that resistance becomes pointless. I discovered this truth during what would become my most celebrated campaign. We faced an enemy force that held every apparent advantage: better positioning, larger numbers, and strong fortifications. Traditional military thinking would have demanded a frontal assault, hoping our courage and skill could overcome their advantages. Instead, I spent weeks studying not how to defeat them in battle, but how to make battle unnecessary. The solution came through understanding the three elements of pre-victory positioning. First, timing. I identified the moment when their apparent strength would become their greatest weakness. Second, positioning. I maneuvered our forces not to attack their strength, but to threaten what they couldn't afford to lose. Third, psychological advantage, created conditions where their confidence turned into doubt, and their strength became a burden rather than an asset. When the campaign concluded, Historians recorded it as a brilliant military victory. But there was no battle. By the time our enemy realized what was happening, surrender was their only rational choice. We had achieved what every strategist dreams of: total victory without the cost, risk, or uncertainty of actual fighting. This principle applies to every area of your modern life. In your career, supreme excellence isn't outworking your competition, it's positioning yourself so that when opportunities arise, you're the obvious choice. In business, it's not beating competitors through superior products or lower prices, it's making competition irrelevant by creating unique value. In relationships, it's not winning arguments, it's building such strong foundations that conflicts resolve themselves. The compass of positioning taught me to think beyond the immediate challenge to the underlying dynamics that determine outcomes. While others prepared for confrontation, I prepared the conditions for victory. While others gathered strength for battle, I gathered intelligence and positioning for inevitable success. This is why my strategies have guided leaders for over 2 millennia. They're not tactics for winning fights, they're principles for creating situations where fighting becomes unnecessary. When you master the art of victory before battle, you join the ranks of those who shape events rather than merely respond to them. Victory belongs to those who see the entire landscape, not just the immediate obstacle. The polished bronze mirror that sits before me has reflected more than just my physical appearance. It has shown me the brutal truths about myself that became the foundation of every victory I achieved. Without ruthless self-knowledge, all strategy becomes worthless decoration on a fundamentally flawed foundation. I learned this lesson during a campaign where my confidence nearly destroyed everything I had built. After several successful engagements, I began to believe my own reputation. I thought my previous victories proved I was invincible, that my strategic mind could overcome any challenge. This self-deception led me to accept a challenge that any honest assessment would have revealed as disastrous. The enemy I faced was perfectly suited to exploit my greatest weakness, impatience with prolonged negotiations. They had studied my previous campaigns and recognized that while I excelled at swift, decisive action, I struggled with extended periods of apparent inactivity. They designed their entire strategy around this single insight about my character. For weeks, they drew out discussions, created false diplomatic opportunities, and presented situations that demanded careful patience. My impatience grew until I finally abandoned careful strategy for immediate action. That premature move cost me the campaign and taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Your enemy's greatest weapon is your own undisciplined nature. That night, staring into this bronze mirror, I developed the practice that would define the rest of my strategic career. I began asking myself for questions before every significant decision. First, what am I trying to prove? This question reveals when ego rather than strategy drives decisions. Second, what am I afraid to acknowledge? This exposes the weaknesses I'd rather ignore than address. Third, where has this pattern failed me before? This connects current decisions to past lessons. Fourth, what would I do if I had to live with the consequences for 10 years? This extends my thinking beyond immediate gratification. These questions saved me from countless disasters because they forced me to see myself as clearly as I saw my enemies. I discovered that I was impulsive when I should be patient, overly cautious when I should be bold, and prone to complexity when simplicity would serve better. But most importantly, I learned that acknowledging these patterns gave me power over them. Self-knowledge prevented my defeats by helping me choose battles where my natural tendencies became advantages rather than liabilities. If I was naturally impatient, I chose situations where speed and decisiveness mattered more than extended planning. If I was naturally analytical, I chose complex challenges where careful thinking provided significant advantages. This principle applies directly to your modern challenges. Before you can position yourself for victory in your career, you must honestly assess your natural strengths and weaknesses. Before you can build successful relationships, you must understand your patterns of behavior under stress. Before you can achieve any significant goal, you must see yourself clearly enough to design a path that works with your nature rather than against it. The bronze mirror taught me that self-deception is the enemy's greatest ally. When you lie to yourself about your capabilities, limitations, or motivations, you hand your opposition a detailed map of how to defeat you. But when you see yourself with absolute clarity, that same knowledge becomes the foundation for unshakable, strategic advantage. Victory begins with the courage to see yourself exactly as you are. The silk terrain maps spread before me tell stories of victory and defeat written in the landscape itself. Most strategists study their enemies obsessively while barely glancing at the ground where the contest will be decided. This is backwards thinking. The territory you choose to fight on matters more than the opponent you choose to fight. I learned this principle during a campaign where understanding terrain turned certain defeat into overwhelming victory. My enemy held every advantage in numbers, equipment, and resources, but they had chosen to meet us in territory they didn't truly understand: mountainous terrain with narrow passes and limited water sources. While they saw only the obvious features, high ground they occupied, and the difficult approach, we would have to make I saw the entire ecosystem of advantage and disadvantage. I noticed that their superior numbers became a liability in the narrow passes where they couldn't deploy effectively. Their heavy equipment became useless on terrain that favored mobility over strength. Most critically, their position, while appearing strong, was actually dependent on supply lines that could be easily severed. By understanding the territory better than they did, I transformed their advantages into vulnerabilities. What looked like their strongest position became a trap they had built for themselves. The terrain itself became my greatest ally, doing most of the work of victory before a single blow was struck. This taught me to identify the 5 types of terrain in every victory pursuit. First, accessible terrain areas where both you and your competition can operate equally well. These require traditional competitive advantages. Second, entangling terrain situations where commitment is easy but withdrawal is difficult. These demand careful consideration before engagement. Third, temporizing terrain neutral ground where neither side gains decisive advantage. These call for patience and positioning. Fourth, narrow terrain situations where size and resources matter less than positioning and timing. These favor strategic thinking over brute force. Fifth, precipitous terrain, higher risk, higher reward situations where swift, decisive action is essential. My method for reading the landscape of opportunity begins with understanding the underlying dynamics rather than the surface appearances. In your career, the territory isn't just your industry or company, it's the network of relationships, the flow of information, the unspoken rules, and the timing of decisions. In business, the territory includes market conditions, regulatory, environment, customer behavior patterns, and technological trends. I once achieved an impossible victory by recognizing that what everyone perceived as unfavorable terrain actually contained hidden advantages. We were facing a larger force in what appeared to be open ground that favored their superior numbers. But I had studied the seasonal patterns of that region and knew that winter floods would soon turn that open ground into a series of islands, connected by narrow causeways. By delaying engagement until the floods arrived, I transformed terrain that favored mass deployment into terrain that favored small, mobile units. Their army became scattered across multiple positions they couldn't adequately defend, while my smaller force could concentrate on individual targets. The landscape itself created the victory, simply had to wait for the right season. Understanding Your territory means seeing beyond the obvious to the underlying patterns that determine outcomes. The ivory intelligence tokens before me represent years of careful study, not just of opposing armies, but of the true nature of opposition itself. Most people make a fatal error. They focus on their competitors when they should be studying the real enemies of their success. I discovered this distinction during a campaign where I spent months preparing to face what I thought was my primary enemy, rival general with a fearsome reputation. I studied his tactics, analyzed his previous victories, and prepared specifically for his style of warfare. But when the actual conflict began, I realized my true enemy wasn't this general at all. My real enemy was time. The longer the campaign lasted, the more my supply lines stretched, and my political support at home weakened. While I was preparing to outmaneuver a brilliant strategist, I was being defeated by logistical realities and political pressures that had nothing to do with military tactics. This experience taught me to identify the three types of opposition you'll face in any pursuit. First, direct competitors. Other people or organizations seeking the same goal. These are obvious and get most of the attention, but they're rarely the determining factor in success or failure. Second, systemic obstacles, the policies, procedures, and established patterns that resist change. These often matter more than direct competition, but receive less attention. Third, internal enemies, your own habits, fears, and limitations that sabotage progress from within. My intelligence gathering methods focused on understanding all three levels simultaneously. For direct competitors, I studied not just their strengths and tactics, but their underlying motivations and pressure points. What did they fear? What did they need to prove? What constraints limited their options? Often, the most valuable intelligence had nothing to do with their military capabilities, and everything to do with their psychological and political vulnerabilities. For systemic obstacles, I studied the rules, both written and unwritten, governed the environment where the contest would be decided, who really held decision-making power, what factors influenced those decisions, what timing considerations affected the entire system. Understanding these dynamics often revealed opportunities that weren't visible to those focused only on direct confrontation. For internal enemies, I developed brutal honesty about my own patterns of self-sabotage. What situations triggered my worst decision-making? What fears caused me to abandon good strategies? What ego needs led me into unnecessary conflicts? This internal intelligence proved just as valuable as any external reconnaissance. I once won a seemingly impossible campaign by recognizing that my opponent's greatest strength, perfectionist planning, was also his greatest weakness. While he spent months developing the perfect strategy, I focused on speed and adaptability. His need for perfect information became paralysis, while my willingness to act on incomplete information became decisive advantage. The ivory tokens remind me that superior intelligence isn't about having more information, it's about having better understanding of what truly determines outcomes. Most people gather intelligence about the wrong things and remain blind to the forces that actually shape their results. Know your enemy, but know your real enemy. The wooden strategy board where I practiced positioning scenarios holds the key to understanding why some people achieve victory with apparent ease, while others struggle despite superior effort. Position determines outcome more than talent, resources, or even strategy itself. Master positioning, and you control the game before it begins. I learned this lesson during a campaign that should have been my greatest defeat. Our enemy had chosen their position first and occupied what appeared to be the strongest ground, high hills with clear views and difficult approaches. Traditional military thinking suggested we were doomed to fight uphill battles on their terms, but I had spent years studying positioning on this very board. playing out scenarios where apparent weakness could become hidden strength. Instead of accepting their positioning advantage, I began to study what their strong position actually required to maintain. I discovered that their elevated position, while defensively strong, was logistically vulnerable. Their clear views worked both ways. They could see us, but we could also predict their movements. Their difficult approaches also meant difficult retreat routes. More importantly, I realized that by accepting their positional challenge, I would be fighting their preferred type of battle. So I chose not to fight for their ground at all. Instead, I positioned my forces to threaten what they valued more than their current position: their supply lines, their political support, and their reputation. This experience taught me the 5 positions of power in any competitive situation. First, the position of initiative, where you force others to respond to your moves, rather than executing their own plans. Second, the position of optionality, where you maintain multiple paths forward while limiting others' choices. Third, the position of information, where you see more of the total situation than your competition. Fourth, the position of timing, where you can choose when to act while others must react to external pressures. Fifth, the position of psychological advantage, where others doubt their ability to succeed while you maintain confidence in your approach. My method for achieving superior positioning begins with understanding that most people think about position in terms of their immediate circumstances, their current job, their present resources, their existing relationships. But strategic positioning requires thinking several moves ahead. Like a master chess player who sees the entire flow of the game rather than just the current arrangement of pieces, I achieved my most celebrated victory through positioning that took months to develop but appeared effortless in execution. While my enemy prepared for direct confrontation, I was quietly arranging circumstances so that direct confrontation would favor me completely. When the decisive moment arrived, they had no good options left. Every move they could make improved my position while weakening theirs. The wooden board taught me that positioning isn't about finding the perfect spot and defending it. It's about continuous movement toward greater advantage. Like water flowing downhill, good positioning seeks the path of least resistance toward the most valuable outcomes in your modern challenges. This means thinking beyond your immediate tactics to your underlying position. Are you positioned to benefit from trends in your industry? Do you have relationships that create opportunities? Are you building capabilities that become more valuable over time? Are you avoiding dependency on factors outside your control? Strategic positioning transforms every challenge from a test of strength into an application of intelligence. The silk deception fan painted with false battle plans reminds me of the most misunderstood principle in strategic thinking. When I say that all warfare is based on deception, people often think I advocate dishonesty or manipulation. But strategic deception isn't about lying. It's about controlling attention and creating advantage through superior understanding of perception versus reality. I learnt this principle during a campaign where traditional honesty would have led to massive casualties on both sides. My enemy expected direct assault because that's what honor and conventional tactics demanded. Instead, I chose to appear weak where I was strong and strong where I was weak. This misdirection allowed me to win decisively while minimizing bloodshed, a victory that served both armies better than honest brutality. That the difference between harmful deception and strategic misdirection lies in purpose and outcome. Harmful deception seeks to cheat others for selfish gain. Strategic misdirection seeks to create conditions where everyone can achieve better outcomes than direct confrontation would provide. It's the difference between lying to steal something and misdirecting attention to prevent unnecessary conflict. My 5 principles of ethical strategic deception guide this approach. First, misdirection should create value, not destroy it. Second, the deception should protect rather than harm those involved. Third, the the ultimate revelation should increase, rather than decrease trust. Fourth, the method should be something you could explain and defend publicly. Fifth, the outcome should serve the greater good, not just personal advantage. These principles transformed how I approached every strategic challenge. Instead of trying to overpower opposition, I learned to redirect it. Instead of meeting force with greater force, I met it with intelligence that made force unnecessary. Instead of fighting against resistance, I channeled that resistance toward outcomes that served everyone better. I once ended a prolonged siege, without bloodshed, by creating the appearance that we were preparing for a lengthy campaign, while actually preparing for immediate withdrawal. The enemy, believing we intended to stay, negotiated terms that gave both sides what they needed most. They preserved their honor and avoided devastating losses, while we achieved our strategic objectives without the cost and risk of assault. The deception actually created the conditions for mutual benefit. In your modern context, this principle applies to every situation where direct confrontation would be costly and inefficient. In negotiations, instead of stating your position directly and creating immediate opposition, you can guide attention toward shared interests and mutual benefits. In workplace politics, instead of challenging resistance directly, you can redirect that energy toward productive outcomes. The key is understanding that people's perceptions shape their actions more than objective reality does. If someone perceives you as a threat, they'll act defensively regardless of your actual intentions. If they perceive an opportunity for mutual gain, they'll act cooperatively even if they initially disagreed with your approach. The silk fan taught me that misdirection works best when it reveals a truth that wasn't initially visible. The false battle plans painted on its surface weren't lies, they were alternative possibilities that became stepping stones to better solutions. True strategic deception doesn't hide reality, it guides attention toward aspects of reality that create better outcomes for everyone involved. This is why my strategies have endured for millennia. They're not tricks to fool people, they're methods for creating conditions where intelligence serves everyone better than force ever could. Master this principle, and you'll find that apparent opposition often transforms into unexpected alliance when approached with sufficient wisdom and skill. The highest form of deception is helping others see truths they couldn't see before. The hourglass of perfect timing sits before me as a reminder of the most delicate aspect of strategic mastery: understanding when to move with lightning speed and when to wait with infinite patience. Victory belongs not to the fastest or the most patient, but to those who master the rhythm that each situation demands. I discovered this principle during a campaign where I had to choose between two approaches that seemed mutually exclusive. Intelligence suggested that immediate action could catch our enemy unprepared and vulnerable, but the same intelligence indicated that waiting 3 more weeks would give us overwhelming strategic advantages. Most strategists would have chosen one approach or the other, speed or patience. Instead, I learned to see timing as a complex rhythm rather than a simple choice. I divided our objectives into those that required immediate action and those that benefited from patient development. We struck swiftly where speed created irreversible advantage, while simultaneously building positions that would mature into overwhelming superiority over time. The campaign succeeded because we operated on multiple time horizons simultaneously. Our immediate actions created chaos and confusion in the enemy's short-term planning, while our patient positioning ensured that their long-term options became increasingly limited. By the time they understood our complete strategy, they faced pressure from both urgent, immediate threats and inexorable long-term disadvantages. This experience taught me that mastering timing requires understanding the natural rhythm of your environment. Every situation has its own temper periods when action creates maximum impact, and periods when waiting allows superior positioning. Like a master musician who knows when to play and when to pause, the strategic mind learns to read these rhythms and move in harmony with them. My method for recognizing the perfect moment to act begins with identifying the convergence of three factors. First, opportunity circumstances that favor your position more than your competition's. Second, capability, your readiness to act decisively when the moment arrives. Third, consequence, the lasting impact that your action will create on the overall situation. When all three factors align, hesitation becomes your enemy. When any factor is missing, premature action becomes your downfall. The hourglass taught me that timing isn't about moving fast or slow, it's about moving in perfect synchronization with the underlying dynamics of your situation. I achieved one of my most celebrated victories by recognizing that our enemy's greatest strength, their careful, methodical planning, created a predictable rhythm I could exploit. They always took exactly 5 days to analyze new information and adjust their positions. This consistency became their vulnerability. I began feeding them accurate but incomplete information on a precise schedule that aligned with their decision-making cycle. Each piece of intelligence led them to make small adjustments that seemed logical, individually but collectively positioned them exactly where I needed them to be. When I finally acted, they were perfectly arranged for their own defeat, and their methodical nature prevented them from responding quickly enough to recover. The rhythm of victory requires both infinite patience in preparation and lightning speed in execution. Those who master this balance discover that timing transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary results. The jade command seal before me represents the most critical lesson I learned about leadership, that you cannot command others effectively until you have achieved absolute command over yourself. Divided leadership, whether internal or external, guarantees defeat, regardless of how brilliant your strategy or how capable your people. I learned this principle during the darkest moment of my career, when internal division nearly destroyed everything I had built. I was leading a campaign with multiple objectives, and I made the fatal error of trying to pursue them all simultaneously without establishing clear priorities. My armies received conflicting orders, my resources were scattered across too many fronts, and my own attention was divided among competing demands. The result was chaos. While each individual action seemed logical and important, the overall effect was paralysis. My forces couldn't act decisively because they didn't know which objective truly mattered most. Worse, I couldn't provide clear guidance because I hadn't achieved clarity within myself about what we were actually trying to accomplish. That night, staring at this jade seal that represented my authority to command others, I realized the terrible irony was trying to lead an army while I couldn't even lead my own thoughts. I was giving orders to others while my own mind was divided among conflicting priorities, uncertain strategies, and contradictory impulses. This revelation led me to develop 5 principles of commanding yourself before commanding others. First, absolute clarity about your ultimate objective, not just what you want to achieve, but why it matters more than other possibilities. Second, ruthless prioritization, the discipline to choose what not to do, even when those alternatives seem valuable. Third, consistent decision-making criteria, principles that guide your choices even under pressure. Fourth, emotional regulation, maintaining equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. Fifth, unified action, ensuring that every choice reinforces your primary direction. These principles transformed my leadership because they eliminated the internal contradictions that had been undermining my external authority. When my own mind operated with perfect unity of purpose, my orders became clear, my strategies became coherent, and my people developed the confidence that comes from following someone who knows exactly where they're going. My method for creating unity of purpose in any team begins with this internal unity. People can sense when a leader is divided within themselves, and that division becomes contagious throughout the organization. But when a leader operates from perfect clarity and consistency, that unity becomes equally contagious. I once saved a desperate military situation by recognizing that our problem wasn't tactical or strategic. It was the lack of unified command. Multiple leaders were giving conflicting orders based on their individual perspectives, rather than a shared understanding of our primary objective. I called an immediate halt to all operations until we could establish absolute clarity about our single most important goal. This pause seemed like weakness to our enemies and delay to my superiors, but it created the foundation for overwhelming victory. Once everyone understood exactly what we were trying to accomplish and why everything else was secondary, our army moved with the precision and power of a single coordinated organism. The Jade Seal taught me that authority doesn't come from rank or title, it comes from the clarity and consistency that inspires others to follow willingly. When you achieve perfect unity within yourself, others naturally align with your direction because they can feel the power of undivided purpose. Unity of command creates unstoppable momentum because it eliminates the internal friction that wastes energy in most organizations and individuals. The flexible willow branch before me survived countless storms that destroyed mighty oak trees, teaching me that adaptability isn't weakness, it's the highest form of strategic strength. Rigid plans break under pressure, but flexible execution, with unwavering purpose, bends without breaking and springs back stronger than before. I learned this lesson during a campaign where my carefully developed strategy became obsolete within hours of implementation. Our enemy had adopted completely unexpected tactics that rendered my planned approach not just ineffective, but actively dangerous. Lesser strategists would have either abandoned their objectives or stubbornly persisted with their original plan until it destroyed them. Instead, I discovered the 5 principles of strategic adaptability that allowed us to achieve our ultimate goal through completely different means. First, maintain clarity about your fundamental purpose while remaining flexible about methods. Second, gather new information continuously and adjust based on current reality rather than past assumptions. Third, preserve core capabilities that can be applied in multiple ways. Fourth, build redundancy into your approach so that failure in one area doesn't compromise everything. Fifth, view unexpected developments as opportunities for superior positioning rather than obstacles to existing plans. The willow branch taught me that true strength lies not in resisting change, but in flowing with it more skillfully than your competition. While our enemies remained committed to their original tactical approach, we adapted our methods 3 times during the campaign, each adaptation moving us closer to victory while moving them further from their objectives. My method for maintaining core strategy while adapting tactics begins with understanding the difference between principles and practices. Principles like achieving strategic advantage, maintaining unity of command, and preserving long-term positioning remain constant, regardless of circumstances. Practices like specific formations, particular routes, or detailed timing must change as conditions change. I achieved one of my most celebrated victories through adaptability that appeared chaotic to observers, but followed clear strategic principles throughout. When our original battle plan became impossible, I shifted to a siege strategy. When the siege became impractical, I transformed it into a diplomatic campaign. When diplomacy stalled, I created a demonstration of force that brought everyone back to negotiations with new respect for our capabilities. Each adaptation seemed like a completely different approach, but they all served the same strategic objective through the most effective means available at each moment. Our enemies, committed to their original approach, found themselves constantly responding to our initiatives rather than executing their own plans. Flexibility in method with firmness in purpose creates the kind of strategic advantage that compounds over time, while rigid thinkers exhaust themselves fighting against changing circumstances. Adaptive strategists use those same changes to accelerate their progress toward their ultimate objectives. The willow survives the storm and grows stronger, while the mighty oak lies broken on the ground. The abacus of campaign resources sits before me as a testament to one of the most overlooked aspects of victory: winning efficiently rather than simply winning. Any fool with unlimited resources can achieve temporary success, but sustainable victory belongs to those who understand the economics of strategic advantage. I learned this principle during a campaign against an enemy with vastly superior resources. They had unlimited funds, larger armies, and the backing of wealthy kingdoms. Traditional thinking suggested that resource disadvantage doomed us to defeat, but I discovered that their abundance was actually their greatest vulnerability. They had never learned to use resources efficiently because they had never needed to. While they deployed massive forces and expensive equipment for every small objective, I developed strategies that achieved superior results with minimal expenditure. While they exhausted their advantages through waste and inefficiency, I multiplied my limited resources through intelligent application and careful conservation. The principle of maximum result with minimum expenditure guided every decision I made. This wasn't about being cheap or cutting corners. It was about understanding that efficiency creates compound advantages over time. Resources saved in one area could be deployed for greater impact in another. Energy conserved during small engagements remained available for decisive moments. My method for resource allocation in any competitive situation begins with distinguishing between three types of expenditure. First, investments resources create lasting advantages and future capabilities. Second, maintenance resources that preserve existing positions and prevent deterioration. Third, consumption resources that provide immediate benefits but don't create lasting value. The abacus taught me to maximize investments, minimize consumption, and carefully calculate maintenance needs. Most people reverse this priority, consume resources for immediate gratification, spend heavily on maintaining status quo, and starve the investments that would create real strategic advantage. I achieved one of my most celebrated victories by recognizing that resource intelligence could triumph over resource abundance. While my wealthy enemy focused on accumulating more soldiers and equipment, I focused on understanding how resources really determined outcomes in our specific situation. I discovered that their supply lines required enormous daily expenditures to maintain, while our more modest force could sustain itself almost indefinitely. Their large army demanded complex coordination that created delays and confusion, while our smaller force could move and adapt quickly. Their expensive equipment required specialist maintenance that made them dependent on factors outside their control. By extending the campaign longer than they had planned for, I turned their resource advantage into a resource burden. They found themselves pouring wealth into maintaining an increasingly expensive military position while we operated sustainably within our means. Eventually, their abundance became exhaustion, while our efficiency remained uncompromised. This principle applies directly to your modern challenges. In career development, efficiency means investing in capabilities that compound over time rather than consuming resources for temporary advantages. In business, it means building sustainable competitive advantages rather than expensive short-term gains. Resource intelligence beats resource abundance, because sustainable victory requires methods that can be maintained indefinitely. Those who win efficiently can keep winning, while those who win expensively eventually exhaust themselves and lose to more intelligent competitors. The obsidian mind mirror reflects the deepest truth of strategic mastery. Victory is won in the mind before it's won on any battlefield. Physical capabilities, resources, and even superior strategy become irrelevant when psychological advantage determines how those factors are applied. Master the mind game, and you control the outcome before action begins. I discovered this principle during a campaign where I faced an enemy whose capabilities exactly matched our own. Equal numbers, similar equipment, comparable tactical knowledge. Every objective analysis suggested the outcome would depend on luck or small tactical advantages. But I realized the equal capabilities meant the battle would be decided by psychological factors that weren't visible on any strategic assessment. The 5 psychological principles that determine outcomes became clear during this campaign. First, confidence versus doubt. Those who believe in their approach execute it more effectively than those who question themselves. Second, initiative versus reaction. Those who control the psychological pace force others into reactive patterns. Third, clarity versus confusion. Those who understand their situation completely outperform those operating with incomplete mental models. Fourth, calm versus stress. Those who maintain emotional equilibrium make better decisions under pressure. Fifth, purpose versus obligation. Those fighting for something they believe in outperform those merely following orders. Understanding these principles allowed me to win decisive psychological advantage, even against equal material forces. While my enemy focused on tactical preparation, I focused on psychological preparation. I ensured our forces understood exactly why victory mattered and how our strategy would achieve it. I created conditions where they felt confident and purposeful, while our enemies felt uncertain and reactive. My method for maintaining mental dominance begins with controlling the narrative that shapes how everyone involved understands the situation. People fight more effectively when they believe they're fighting for something important, using methods that make sense toward outcomes that seem achievable. People fight poorly when they doubt their cause, question their strategy, or fear their chances of success. I achieved what many consider my greatest psychological victory by recognizing that my enemy is superior. Reputation was actually a psychological burden. Everyone expected them to win easily, which meant any difficulty or delay would be interpreted as failure. Meanwhile, everyone expected us to lose, which meant any success would be interpreted as extraordinary achievement. I used this psychological asymmetry to create a campaign where small victories for us had massive psychological impact, while small setbacks for them created doubt and questioning. Their soldiers began wondering why the easy victory was taking so long. While our soldiers gained confidence with each successful engagement, the obsidian mirror taught me that psychological warfare isn't about manipulation or deception, about understanding how mental states affect performance and creating conditions where superior mental states emerge naturally. When people feel confident, purposeful, and clear about their objectives, they perform at levels that surprise even themselves. This principle transforms every aspect of your modern challenges. In your career, psychological advantage comes from believing in your value while others doubt themselves. In negotiations, it comes from remaining calm while others become emotional. In any competitive situation, it comes from controlling the mental framework that determines how success and failure are interpreted. The mind game of victory rewards those who understand that capabilities matter less than the confidence to use them effectively. The network of messenger birds that once carried intelligence across my campaigns represents the principle that superior information creates superior outcomes with mathematical certainty. In every contest, those who know more and act faster on that knowledge defeats those who know less. Regardless of other advantages, I learned this lesson during a campaign where intelligence proved more valuable than armies. Our enemy held every conventional advantage: better positioning, larger forces, superior equipment. But they had one critical weakness. They operated on assumptions about our capabilities and intentions that were completely wrong. While they prepared for the type of campaign they expected us to fight. I gathered precise intelligence about their actual preparations, their supply routes, their political pressures, and, most importantly, their decision-making patterns. This intelligence revealed opportunities that were invisible to anyone operating on assumptions rather than facts. The 5 types of intelligence that determine victory became clear through this experience. First, situational and understanding of current conditions and immediate circumstances. Second, capability, intelligence, precise knowledge of what all parties can actually accomplish. Third, intentional intelligence, insight into what others are really trying to achieve. Fourth, temporal intelligence, understanding of timing factors and deadlines that constrain decisions. Fifth, systemic intelligence, knowledge of the larger patterns and pressures that shape the entire competitive environment. My method for gathering and processing strategic intelligence begins with understanding that information without analysis is worthless, while analysis without accurate information is dangerous. The messenger birds taught me that intelligence systems must be faster than decision cycles. You must know what's happening and what it means before your competition finishes reacting to the previous development. I achieved one of my most celebrated intelligence victories by recognizing that our enemy's strength in one area created predictable weaknesses in others. Their focus on protecting their main force meant their supply lines were lightly defended. Their emphasis on speed meant their communication systems were simplified, and therefore more vulnerable to disruption. Most importantly, I discovered that their commander made decisions based on a specific type of intelligence that I could influence. By controlling what information reached him and when, I could predict his responses with remarkable accuracy. This allowed me to stay several moves ahead throughout the entire campaign. Superior intelligence creates compound advantages, because each piece of accurate information improves the quality of every subsequent decision. While our enemies operated on guesswork and assumptions, we operated on facts and verified analysis. While they reacted to what seemed to be happening, we responded to what was actually happening. The network of messenger birds taught me that intelligence advantage isn't about having access to secret information. It's about having better systems for gathering, analyzing, and acting on information that determines outcomes. In your modern context, this means developing sources of insight that others don't have, processing that information more effectively, and acting on conclusions faster than your competition. Those who master the intelligence advantage discover that knowledge truly is power, but only when combined with the wisdom to use that knowledge effectively. The diplomatic seal ring that once formalized my alliances holds the secret of political intelligence understanding. That victory often depends more on who fights with you than on how well you fight. Master the politics of alliance and isolation, and you can defeat superior forces without superior strength. I learned this principle during a campaign where I faced multiple enemies who individually matched our capabilities, but collectively overwhelmed us. Traditional strategic thinking suggested we needed to become stronger or our enemies needed to become weaker. But I discovered a third option, changing who was fighting whom. By understanding the political dynamics that determined alliances, my enemies were united only by their shared opposition to our expansion. They had conflicting interests, competing ambitions, and historical grievances with each other that had been temporarily set aside. I realized that their alliance was actually more fragile than their individual military capabilities were formidable. The 5 principles of strategic alliance building emerged from this campaign. First, identify shared interests that transcend temporary conflicts. Second, understand what each potential ally values most and how your success can advance their objectives. Third, recognize that timing matters. Alliances formed during strength have different dynamics than alliances formed during weakness. Fourth, build relationships before you need them, not when crisis makes you desperate. Fifth, remember that the best alliances serve everyone's interests so well that betrayal becomes unthinkable. My method for isolating opposition while building support begins with understanding the network of relationships and interests that shape any competitive environment. Every person or organization exists within a web of dependencies, obligations, and opportunities. Change the dynamics of that web, and you change the balance of power without needing to change your own capabilities. I achieved my most celebrated political victory by recognizing that my enemy's alliance contained the seeds of its own destruction. Two of my opponents had competing claims to the same territory that they planned to divide after defeating us. I simply accelerated the timeline of that inevitable conflict by demonstrating that our defeat wasn't certain and that the campaign would take longer than expected. I created pressure that revealed the underlying tensions in their alliance. As their costs increased and their timeline extended, they began questioning whether they trusted their allies enough to continue paying those costs. The diplomatic seal taught me that political intelligence often matters more than military intelligence, because it determines the context within which all military action takes place. An army that must fight on multiple fronts will lose to a smaller force that has political support. A strategy that creates enemies will fail against a strategy that creates allies. This principle applies directly to your modern challenges. In your career, success often depends on who supports your advancement, not just on your individual performance. In business, market success frequently comes from partnership strategies that isolate competitors rather than direct competitive battles. In any complex situation, those who understand the political dynamics can achieve objectives that seem impossible through direct action alone. The politics of victory rewards those who think beyond immediate confrontation to the larger web of relationships that determine long-term outcomes. The ceremonial victory sword represents the moment when all strategy, preparation, and positioning must transform into decisive action. Perfect execution separates those who create opportunities from those who capitalize on them, while follow-through determines whether victory becomes temporary success or permanent transformation. I learned this lesson during a campaign where months of strategic positioning created the perfect moment for decisive action. Every principle I had mastered: superior positioning, intelligence, advantage, psychological dominance. Alliance building had aligned to create an opportunity that would determine the outcome of the entire conflict. But opportunity without flawless execution is worthless. The 5 principles of perfect execution became clear in that crucial moment. First, absolute clarity about the objective. Everyone must understand exactly what success looks like. Second, simplified action plans. Complexity creates confusion when speed and precision matter most. Third, unified timing. All elements must move in perfect coordination. Fourth, decisive commitment. Hesitation or half measures guarantee failure. Fifth, immediate assessment. Understanding results quickly enough to adjust if necessary. The victory sword taught me that execution differs fundamentally from planning. Planning requires careful analysis and deliberate consideration. Execution requires instinctive response and total commitment. The strategic mind that excels at complex analysis must transform into the tactical mind that excels at immediate action. My method for maintaining focus during crucial moments begins with understanding that pressure reveals character more than capability. People who perform well under normal circumstances may falter when everything depends on their actions. Conversely, those who seem ordinary during preparation may discover extraordinary capabilities when execution demands their best. I achieved one of my most celebrated victories through execution that appeared simple but required perfect timing and coordination. The actual decisive action took less than an hour, but it was supported by months of positioning that made that hour possible. When the moment arrived, every element moved exactly as planned, and our enemy found themselves defeated before they realized the attack had begun. But victory in the moment meant nothing without proper follow-through. The ceremonial sword reminds me that winning a battle isn't the same as winning a war, and winning a war isn't the same as winning a lasting peace. Many victors destroy their own success by failing to consolidate their gains or by becoming overconfident. After initial triumph, follow-through requires different skills than initial victory. It demands patience where execution demanded speed, sustainability where execution demanded intensity, and diplomatic wisdom where execution demanded force. The leaders who create lasting transformation understand that the moment of victory is actually the beginning of a new phase of strategic challenge. This principle applies to every significant achievement in your modern life. Landing the job, closing the deal, or achieving the goal represents execution. But building a successful career, growing the business, or maintaining the achievement requires follow-through. Those who master both phases create compound success that builds on itself over time. The victory sword teaches that opportunity plus execution plus follow-through equals transformation. While any missing element leads to temporary success, followed by eventual return to previous conditions, the eternal flame of wisdom burns before me as I prepare to share the final secrets that will transform these ancient principles into your modern victories. This flame has burned continuously for over 2 millennia because the laws of victory transcend time, culture, and circumstance. What guided armies can guide careers. What won kingdoms can win your personal battles, your specific life challenges, whether you're fighting for recognition in your career, building relationships that matter, growing a business, or pursuing personal goals, follow the same fundamental patterns I discovered on ancient battlefields. The principles never change, only their application evolves. The 5-step process for implementing victory strategy in any area begins with self-knowledge. Before you can position yourself for victory, you must understand your natural strengths, your limiting weaknesses, and the patterns that have shaped your past results. This isn't about self-criticism, it's about strategic self-awareness that allows you to choose battles where your nature becomes an advantage. Second, master your territory. Whether your arena is corporate politics, entrepreneurial markets, or personal relationships, you must understand the underlying dynamics that determine outcomes. Who really makes decisions? What factors influence those decisions? What timing considerations affect the entire system? Superior territorial knowledge creates positioning advantages that less observant competitors never see. Third, gather intelligence continuously. In your modern context, this means developing sources of insight that others don't have, processing information more effectively than your competition, and acting on conclusions faster than those around you. The intelligence advantage compounds, because each piece of accurate information improves every subsequent decision. Fourth, build alliances while isolating opposition. Success in complex environments requires political intelligence, understanding who can help you, who might hinder you, and how to align interests so that your victory serves others' objectives as well. The strongest position is one where your success creates value for everyone whose support you need. Fifth, execute with perfect timing and follow through completely. Opportunity without execution is worthless. But execution without follow-through leads to temporary victories that fade into irrelevance. Master both phases, and you create compound success that builds momentum over time. My final wisdom concerns what separates temporary wins from lasting victory. Temporary wins depend on circumstances, luck, and superior effort in specific situations. Lasting victory depends on understanding principles that work regardless of circumstances. When you master these principles, you become the type of person who creates opportunities rather than merely recognizing them. The eternal flame teaches that true victory isn't about defeating others, it's about becoming so strategically intelligent that competition becomes unnecessary. When you position yourself perfectly, when you understand your environment completely, when you build alliances effectively, others don't need to lose for you to win. The highest victory creates value for everyone involved. This is why my teachings have guided leaders across cultures and centuries. They're not tricks for winning conflicts, they're principles for creating conditions where everyone can achieve better outcomes through intelligence rather than force. Now, I challenge you personally. Take these principles and apply them to your most important current challenge. Start with perfect self-knowledge. Understand your territory completely. Gather intelligence others miss. Build alliances that serve everyone. And execute with timing that creates lasting transformation. The eternal flame of wisdom now burns within. You honor these teachings by putting them into practice, and carry forward this legacy of strategic excellence into your modern victories.